podcast where we talk about all things parenting. And today I am speaking with Chris Downs about empowering parents and caregivers, looking at all the benefits and challenges of embracing your child as a whole person and discovering who they are in the world. How do we listen well? How do we set limits well? How do we zero in on what's important to our family and tolerate not doing it all? You know, if our children are struggling, what's our job as a parent? How do we take care of ourselves? All of these good things and all of these really, really, really hard things to deal with and tackle. Chris has over 2 decades as a child and family therapist and play therapist, and she's excellent at what she does. I'm super, super psyched to have you on the show, Chris, and to ask a lot of questions. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So million questions for you. So when people say follow a child's lead, what does that actually mean? Because that can be kind of confusing.
So I think of it as watching our children and listening to what they have to say and what they have to tell us. So I think that starts early on, as early as possible. And it's noticing what your child's doing in the world, what they're playing. I actually use a technique called special playtime that I can tell you a little bit about.
Please.
So for kids like 0 to 6, it's actually really, you can Google it. It's everywhere. I love this because it's not something that's patented or protected. And so it's 5 minutes of play every day. It's like a vitamin. It's like your child's vitamin. And so you sit and you play with them and you reflect what they're doing. So they're driving at 2, they're driving a truck. You say, you're driving a truck. I'm putting blocks in the truck. You're putting blocks in the truck. I knocked the truck over. You knocked the truck over. It feels repetitive, like with that age. But what it's doing, it's mostly for you as the parent, practicing sitting with your child and reflecting what they're doing. So as they age and they come home from school and they say, Joey punched me at school today, instead of getting all fired up as a parent, you're settling into yourself and you're saying, Joey punched you at school today. Because just reflecting that really lets your child know you heard them, but now it's their job to tell you their experience of that situation. And so you start as young as you can, and then you start practicing this. But this 5 minutes of play each day, I'm still doing it with my 6-year-old, where we sword fight for 5 minutes a day, and I reflect what's happening in the play. And then the other piece of it is praising, like, oh, I love that move you just did to me. You know, that was really creative and you spun in a circle. Because again, it's like noticing what they're doing well in the world. So as they age, you notice other things about who they are, not that they got A's on a test, but like the things that they value. You know, they spend 22 hours on Legos. You go in and you're like, oh my gosh, you built this here and you built that there. And so all of it is really developing the relationship with your child for ongoing issues as they go, you know, as things develop later in life.
Right. And it's interesting because I'm noticing the language you're using, and you're not saying, oh my God, that's the coolest thing ever you've built, or that's so beautiful. You're not labeling it. You're just saying, oh, how creative. Or look, you built this.
Right. I'm giving them lots of space for what they're going to impose on it, because it's not going to be about me. It's about them telling me about themselves.
So what you're saying is that this, and what's it called again?
That's special playtime.
Special playtime. And you're reflecting. So when you're doing it with your 17-year-old kid, so you're saying you're starting young, so you're practicing when the stuff gets bigger and it's harder not to have a reaction. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Right.
Okay. So with a 16-year-old following the child's lead, what does that look like?
Do you have an example in mind?
Okay, so yeah, the kid is caught smoking pot.
Great.
What's following the lead in that?
You know, if it's the police, if it's like another parent, a teacher, you know, so-and-so, or they know it, like, you were caught smoking pot. Like you're maintaining a neutrality about this because you really don't know what their experience was. And so then you're still going to decide, right, how you're going to respond to this, but the immediate scenario isn't something that you want to impose all of your stuff into.
I see. So it's giving you, actually just reflecting back is giving you a second to compose yourself, to allow them to talk.
Yes, I mean, that's the other piece of it. Because when I was working with parents in the cooperative play school, and we were talking about kids like playing doctor and like, sexual development and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And this one mom, like, adamant, like, I can't, I am blowing up. I can't, I'm not going to contain that. I'm like, yes, but in not containing yourself, you have no idea what the experience is for the children involved. And then once you steamroll that thing, it's
Right.
done, right? And so there's opportunities for repair as parents. Like, we can repair those things still, but if we don't start with blowing it up, then we don't have as much for ourselves to repair. We still have to do things, but it's not necessarily fixing the damage that we have done.
Well, let's talk about the repair for a second. Let's go back to that 16-year-old kid and let's pick something different than pot. Let's pick that they were arrested for stealing something. And let's say this is the second arrest or something. Like, let's say there's a pattern of behavior. Talk to me about repairing after you have the reaction, because I can imagine if Charlie's 16 and showing repetitive behavior that's problematic, as much as I'd like to say I try to do the right thing, I can imagine losing it pretty quickly.
Okay, well, so there's two things you're talking about. Is like your own repair after losing it, and then your child coming home or having to pick them up at the police station because they've done something pretty awful or have gotten themselves in trouble. And so I think like in previous generations, we thought we could like will kids to what we want. And they're autonomous individuals, right? Like, they're born that way. Like, they're saying like, I hate you, or I need space from you, or whatever, right? So by the time they're 16 and they get arrested, like, the thing that sucks the most is this sucks for them,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
disappointed as a parent, but this is like, things are happening in their world that you want. Like, I feel like we have the 0 to 18 where we get some influence in this. And so at 16, what are they looking at 18 and 20? Like, what is it that they want for their lives? And so when this is happening, how are you as a parent sitting with your own disappointment? Like, I can't, because there's all that stuff too we carry, right? The guilt that we carry, like, oh my God, like, I know you would be like, oh my God, I didn't do this when he was 4.
Yeah.
He's getting arrested.
Of course.
Right?
Of course. Right. I didn't give him the banana before bed that he wanted. That was that face.
Now he just can't contain, and so like hopefully those sorts of things don't happen. And then, I mean, that also, that one's, yeah. So it's kind of sitting with them and what they want. And then like, you might come to some limits in that scenario. Like, I'm not sure. You'd have to sit with your child to figure out like what might feel like where you'd want to use your authority as
Got you. When you do it with younger kids, when you have this special playtime with younger kids, does the reflecting back ever backfire? Because I really like that. It's just 5 minutes and it's just noticing what they're doing and saying it out loud.
Right. So so the 3 things are like praising them, paraphrasing, and reflecting. And so if they say words, you say those words back or some variation, the praising, and it's kind of like a sports reporter, like you're saying what they're doing. Yes, absolutely, it backfires because they're like, stop repeating me.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, so it's somewhere along the way they realize that the repeating is like, you're actually repeating verbatim what they're saying. And
so then
like,
you could say, oh, you said stop repeating me. Sorry.
Right? They're like telling you, you're like, oh, like in your brain, you're thinking, oh, developmentally, you've moved along enough that you're noticing this as a problem. Like, thank you so much for telling me. Like, I'm really happy to know, like, oh, you don't like that. You don't like when I'm doing that. And they're like, no. And I say, oh, thank you. Okay. And so then that's like an indicator to me as the parent, like, my child's older and now I have to like mix it up a little bit. And so that's, yeah. And so then I don't repeat as much, or I find other ways of repeating or noticing what they're doing.
So you're still sitting with them. You're still doing the play. You're still doing the praising, but you just might not be doing the repeating.
Right. Not the like verbatim.
If it's starting to annoy them.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's an assertion, right, from them. Like, so anytime our kids are like asserting themselves, it's like, that's fantastic, right? Because who better to practice it on than us? And then that
Sure.
also gets annoying to us after a while. It's like they're asserting themselves all over the place, but that's different. So
Definitely. Definitely. Okay. So tell me about, like, in your experience as a therapist, you've been doing this for a while and you've seen dynamics and you've dealt with really, really hard situations. What do you feel? Obviously, listening to your child is so key. And what you're saying is you're in it with a child, you're present in a child, and you're observing and you're listening and you're hearing and reflecting. What gets in the way of us listening to our kids in general? And like, what's good about it? What's bad about it? What's all this stuff about listening?
well, so many things get in the way, like
Mm-hmm.
us, we're busy, we have a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
I do
Mm-hmm.
the special playtime actually. I'm still continuing with my 10-year-old. Like I do it before bed each night, and
Mm-hmm.
it just extends bedtime a little. They start to ask for it, and so then it feels like important to do it because it's a way that we connect before bed each night, where like I'm really looking at them and I'm responding to them. But I'm tired and I don't want to do it sometimes, a lot of times, I guess. But then every time, I don't know, it's kind of like every time I do it, it's like rewarding, and like we settle into that. So I think like when you're listening to your child, the things that they tell us, I think again in previous, it feels like an evolution of generational like parenting. I think in previous generations of like, like being seen and not heard, you hear things about that, and
Right.
like really listening, like we're making space for their voice, and sometimes it's in counter to what we want, right?
Yeah.
So like when we're making space for like they can pick which pair of shoes they're going to wear out the door, that could delay us getting out the door. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's where you as the parent, like you are the grown up, you have the power, you're the authority, and so you still have that role in all of this. So when you have to get out the door, you're like, these are the shoes you're wearing, and you put them on their feet or give them to them. Like that's not where you're giving choices or really listening well either.
Right. But what's the line there? Like that's where I personally get confused. What is the line? What is the line of you're wearing these shoes and we're leaving now versus here are your two options?
So don't give options when you have to get out the door, and give options at other times.
There's all these theories of parenting, gentle parenting, positive parent, all of these types of theories of parenting. What's the line though with like leaning into those versus showing your child and I'm not asking this well, but
No,
like
no, I feel like
give
you're
you an example. Like I remember when I was a kid, and this is, a lot of us, like I definitely was dragged to the bank. I spent a lot of time on the bank floor or the supermarket. Like I followed what I got a lot of, like I did a lot of things that I wanted to do, but I also followed the lead of my parents. Like if my parents had to run errands, I was going with them. Like it was not a choice. So I'm kind of curious in like, where is the line between showing authority and leaning into these kind of methods of parenting?
I think your question is so good, because I think that's one of the things that I do in my practice and work with parents on is their own values and what are their priorities, because there's so many things out there with gentle, all the things you said. There was this one study, one thing type of parenting, and I was like, oh yeah, this looks like it's going to be good, and then it still blamed the mother, and I'm like, it's always circles back to like
Always the mother.
blame the mother. It's like we've done it wrong again. And I just,
Mother.
okay, we can't, we're like so good and we're so centered, and we're like, our kids are getting so much from us. So like,
Right.
but if they don't bang up against our limits, then they don't learn that it actually interferes with their sense of safety in the world. Like, so as a parent, you still have to go grocery shopping. And
Right.
so to me, the listening to your child is different, and knowing your child as a whole person and getting your errands done are two separate things. And so the listening can be done in all different ways. And it doesn't mean you don't take them to the grocery store. Like if that's something that is necessary to do, that's just becomes a matter of fact, a matter of course, you go to the grocery store with me. If they're in the carriage and they're like melting down, you have to decide if you leave the grocery store because this is so annoying to you, or if you just keep on pushing with like a melting down child in the grocery cart. Like your demeanor and how you're bringing yourself to this is what your child will remember. They're not going to remember that they melted down in the grocery store, except if you lose your ever loving mind, and then
Then they'll
like,
remember.
then they'll remember, because it's like it is you and your ability to like manage the situation, and have them feel safe in the situation. They're contained. They're sad that they can't get 14 candy bars or whatever it is, but you've said no, and that's okay.
Right. So talk about that a little bit more, that pushing up against the limits that a parent sets helps them recognize their safety in the world. I love that. That is a great way to frame that. And it's so true. Can you talk about that more, and like setting limits and you know, how to set limits, how to communicate limits? Like if they want that candy bar and you don't want to give that candy bar, you don't want to buy that candy bar for whatever reason, how do you set that limit?
So you say like, you really want that candy bar. I hear you. That feels very important to you. I can't buy that candy bar today. I'm not buying that candy bar.
I want that candy bar.
Yes, you do. And we're going to get these things from the grocery store, and I'm not getting the candy bar.
What if it keeps going?
Then
We
you just
keep
stop
doing it.
talking.
When do you stop talking?
When you feel like you've been clear and empathic, and you need to
Mhm.
get on to the next step.
Okay. And what typically happens with that? Because I think that's really important. Like, I think it's hard to dictate when it's time to just stop communicating and kind of ignore the ongoing power struggle.
So I think for multiple reasons, that is hard. And so um that's like with my kids, I'll like give them a heads up, like so that they know this is coming. And I sometimes coach myself
Mm,
out loud after the like third time I've said, you really want this and I'm not giving it to you. And then I realized I said it 3 times. I'm like, oh, the next time I'm not responding. I just want you to know I love you. I'm not responding anymore. And then I stop.
okay. So you
It's
give them a warning.
well, almost, because I have to warn myself. I have to remind myself, like, am allowed to set this limit right now.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
this really gray area I think we get into as parents, like in this current generation of parenting, because we are listening and we are paying attention. And so if we're empathic to our children, do we have to give them everything? No. The empathy is because I want to know you as a person. I want to understand that this is what's important to you and what you value in the world. If something awful happens in your life, I want you to come to me. Like I want
Mm-hmm.
a resource. I don't want you to feel like you have to shove down. I was listening to your podcast on gender, was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And your co-host talked about her son
Mm-hmm.
and his long hair, and
Mm-hmm.
then he died at Magenta,
Mm-hmm.
and how her home was such a safe home. And the interaction with society takes a whole other thing. But
Yeah.
he was making her home safe. And he was saying, this is what I want. And she was saying, yes, actually, to a lot of things, because she was going to help him navigate the world. And he had the strength, the way she was talking about it, to navigate the world. And so,
Mm.
how do we have our homes be safe places where our kids can have all of their feelings and all of their expressions, while we still like the reason I bring up the gender, because is she like, for some parents that would feel very uncomfortable to send your son
Right.
with long hair and magenta out in the world, like,
Right.
and so for some kids, some parents might ask their kid to hold that, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what you don't want to do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to tamp down the things, like who they are, and like as they're like leading with, this is my daughter has gone out in the most like wildly like beautiful outfits, but people, and she doesn't even want people to comment on them. It's who she is. And my mom was like, but she doesn't match. And I'm like, but she feels like she matches.
Right.
But so am I, like, I felt like I was imposing on her to match for
Right.
some big thing out there that
Right. For some societal thing.
right. And the confidence with which she goes out in the world, and these, there's nothing that I need to do more than what
Right. Right. Because and I like how you're like that home is safe. Like she can
right.
do that. You know, it's interesting. So, uh, Charlie, who's almost 5, is going through a phase recently where he likes to say, I get to make my own decisions. And, I mean, he's become 14 years old. I like overnight. I'm like, who are you? And a lot of his decisions end up being no. Like he likes to say the word no. And I've realized that he's also modeled it because a lot of things that he wants, like Matt and I will say no. Like I've realized we've done some of that modeling, but I like to make he's very firm now. This is I get to make my own decisions. And I've been trying to figure out how to navigate that one because he gets to make some decisions. He doesn't get to make all the decisions.
Right.
And I'm having trouble navigating. What's your advice on that?
I mean, it's a moment. It's like what you like. It's good that you and Matt say no. That's great.
Yes.
And so, like, where do you say yes, and where does he make his own decisions, and how do you like notice like he did such a good job making that decision, and he picked out some whatever it was he did that was like fantastic,
right?
And you really like loved the decision he made. You know, just kind of praising. Not you don't need to like reinforce him into being something different than he is, but like building up the times he makes his own decisions and keep saying no. Like you have to keep drawing those other limits.
I love that. I love that. So pointing out when he is
that if you as a parent are finding that like I was going with my daughter, we were dealing with some issues related to neurodiversity. And I didn't know it was neurodiversity. I thought it was like oppositional behavior. And so like for the long, so I would wind up apologizing and having to repair. And like, I felt myself noticing over and over again that I was apologizing. And I'm like, I have to change my behavior. Like, what is like, once I'm apologizing, once I'm noticing I'm behaving in the same way and I'm getting frustrated in the same way over and over again with who she is, like I had to step back and understand better what was going on. And so then it was time for me to like check in with myself. And so like going to therapy, like doing my own work to understand what is getting triggered in me, that I'm finding this intolerable, and I'm setting limits that actually don't feel like good, safe limits. Like when I'm saying keep your home to be safe and for you as the adult to be holding your child in this like container with needing to say no. There were times that I was like really frustrated or really angry, or things that were coming up for me that weren't about her anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's the other risk, is if we don't repress our children properly, we're going to know about like what's hard for them in the world. And so like we have to then like check in with ourselves or what's happening in their world that might be contributing to what's hard for them.
You know, it's funny you said if we don't repress our children properly.
I mean that, like, because I feel like that's where we came from. Is like I wasn't allowed.
I see. Okay, I thought you had a Freudian slip.
No. I mean, I think the way parents are headed with this and with listening well, I think society hasn't caught up with that. So I think parents judge each other, they judge their kids. There's all of these things. I think for Black and brown people in the world, like when we're talking about that supermarket scenario, that's a much different scenario for someone who, when we know that more Black children are in foster care and that children and youth get called on than white children. So those parents are absolutely thinking about that sort of thing differently because of societal pressure.
Right.
But we'd like for the society to change so that all kids can melt down equally in the supermarket with a parent who's setting firm limits.
Right. I'm writing a couple of notes. I want to ask you about the labels as parents. I think I want to spend time there. Before we do, you mentioned two things. One, you mentioned like what's an example of not a safe limit? You said you were getting frustrated with your daughter and you recognize you weren't creating safe limits.
Every time I handed her a plate, the plate would like fall out of her hands. And I or a cup or all of these things that so eventually she was diagnosed with a coordination disorder that made perfect sense. But there was something that was happening in me that I could feel like she wasn't doing this on purpose. That's it. It's like whatever was happening for her, what she was, and I was making it like I wasn't always boiling over, but when I would boil over, it was awful for her because it wasn't intentional. So I think like when you're asking about safe limits, it's like if your child is repeatedly struggling with something over and over again, and you feel like you're in the same place, there's something else going on there.
I see. So you have to step beyond your own frustration or your own feelings about it and look at what might be
Right.
causing
It's
this.
beyond limit setting. It's beyond like
It's
some sort of
beyond that. I love that.
intervention. Yeah.
You know this person too, someone else that I've done a podcast with, Hillary Katz. She always says something that I appreciate very much. She said, and I'm probably going to botch it up the way I'm saying it, but that kids do the best they can.
Right.
And if they're not doing something the way you want them to do, it's probably because they don't also have the ability yet. They might not have the ability yet to do that. And I think same with adults. Like we don't always know, like you're talking about, you were getting frustrated, but something else was going on with your daughter.
Right.
And I think that's important to keep
I
in
think
mind.
Hillary's absolutely right. Is that and like that's one of the things that to keep in mind is kids are doing the best with what they have, and so anything that they're telling us in their behaviors or their words or is like information for us.
It's
And like
information,
for
right?
the adult to decide how to respond to. So if we think they're doing their best, then what is it? Like what are the supports that they need or what is happening?
Right.
Um
The other thing you've referred to a lot, and I asked you before about it, but you keep on saying the word repair. And you talked about self-repair, doing therapy, doing self-reflection. But what about repairing it with your child? Like, what about having like if you were having a lot of frustration toward your daughter, the plates were dropping and all that, and you reacted in a certain way, how do you repair? Not just with your daughter, like with anyone, with any
yeah, I mean,
child.
I think this is like one of those like new things like in life or whatever that we're learning about ourselves and other people
Yeah.
that we should have been doing all along. Um and so there's even like there's an article in the New York Times about apologizing, and it's the noticing what you did and then the pausing. So like I got really frustrated when you dropped the plate, and then I have to pause.
Yeah.
Because like it goes back to then her experience, and I don't know. I know that I felt bad about how I reacted, but it's up to her. Like I need to sit with her and tolerate whatever comes back at me from her before I say I'm sorry and I walk away, or whatever that thing is like how to give a good apology, like how to really listen to what she's saying and what that felt like to her.
Yep.
Because if I can say, what I did, and then she can say, like, yeah, that was really bad. Like, you were really mean. And I say, like, I was really mean. Like, it was that I don't like how I talk to you. And she says, yeah, like, that's not okay. And I say, you're right. Like, that's not okay. So even if your child has done something that really they shouldn't have done, but you still respond that way, that apology looks the same.
Right.
Like, so they intentionally dumped a cup of water on the ground and you lose your mind, like that apology looks the same. You don't want them to, but it doesn't, because there's no but in there, but you shouldn't pour the water, because by then you've shifted it to like you're who you, like what's happening with you with that, that over thing,
Right.
And so, but then practice, Nicole, like then she like trusts me. So like the next time I do something like that, she's like, my mom is like strong enough that she can handle handle my coming back at her. And so when she's like, don't talk to me that way, and I'm like, right, you are right.
Right.
I can't talk to you that way. Thank you for reminding me. I'm sorry.
Yep. Yeah.
And then that empowers her to go out in the world knowing no one should ever talk to her that way.
Right. And you're giving her that voice.
To her friends, I don't like the way you're talking to me, or like all the things, like, so we're human beings as parents, and we're going to like make all the mistakes of human beings. But when we can repair with our kids, they get all of that practice of what that experience is like, that strengthens them to go out and use that their whole selves in the world, that they're not going to like be sidestepping things, and it helps with confrontation. It helps with so many different things.
Yeah. It's interesting with repairing. I, do that a lot with Charlie. I never had a label for it. I never had a word for it. I called it apologizing, but I like repairing. But it's interesting. I have been teaching him, there's something called situation behavior impact that in my work with adults and like corporations, like we're so used to blaming, like you made me feel that way, or you did that. We're so used to that. But situation, like thinking about giving feedback or an apology or just feedback, apology is feedback in the context of situation behavior impact. So when the water dropped on the floor and you were laughing, I felt very angry and I started talking in a mean way to you. And then that dialogue happening, because what I'm doing here is I'm identifying the situation. I'm identifying the behavior. There was laughing behavior, and I'm identifying the impact, like how I responded. So there can't be any arguing with how I feel, but there can, and I'm not blaming, I'm talking about the impact from the situation. I'm not saying you made me feel angry, but I've been starting to do that with Charlie to try to help him kind of separate, like, because there's, I mean, he's a baby, he's little, like, just to try to get him out of the you caused that, you're bad. And so that leads to the conversation you're talking about, where he's allowed to say, yeah, you were mean to me, you were angry at me, and then we're able to talk about that. And I was, and I'm sorry about that.
And it doesn't mean that you like let your children dump water on the floor, right? Because like what becomes the priority when we act, because I say to my kids, I'm like, I need a moment, like I feel myself getting, and I'm gonna step away, I'm coming back, but I just like need to not, like I need to be in control of myself in this moment. And for multiple, because when you feel that like you're working your day, there's all these different things that are like what we're carrying as the adult, and we don't want to like on our kids, right? And so if we recognize that, how do we step away and then come back to things? And then that same with the water that winds up on the floor, like you're going to revisit that at some point. Like the water can't get dumped on the floor.
Right.
When the water gets dumped on the floor, here's a towel, and like, and with my younger one, we dry it up together, like, or whatever. And then it's just, you're building humans, like you keep chipping away, like none of it, you have to have the limits still too, right? Because you can't take the full onus. You the mom did not dump the water on the floor. You the 4-year-old did dump the water.
Let's shift to talking about all the parenting labels and all the stuff and all the, like, there's so much coming at us with parents, like so many labels, so many like things to do and not to do, and do this, don't do this, or this is going to screw up your kid, or this is not going to screw up your kid. Like, how do you just like get past that and just be with your family? I find that hard.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I don't know what happened. I have to put my thought into like what happened that we're here, that like a competitive labeling, like you're a good professional if you've like successfully labeled and given parents like the 10 things to do and not to do. And I think about it sometimes like we weren't given manuals, like at birth, like you get a car manual, you get like you have to take driving lessons, but with kids you don't get a manual. And I've been thinking about that. Like I think it's too complicated, right? Because it's individual families. You can't give actually a manual. And so I think that what's useful about the information coming out is that if you can take in some of it and you read something and you're like, oh, that resonates for me, I think that would work for my family. And when I implement it, I feel a little more peaceful in my relationship with my child. Then that's like, oh, good. Like you should do that. Then that works. If there's something that you're reading and it just feels too hard and it's like encounter to, I don't know. I've kind of like, I've read a lot about all of the different labels. I like being quiet with my children. I like when I just did that like repair scenario with you, like I feel centered and grounded with my kids when I do that. I feel centered and grounded with my kids when I'm doing the play, the 5 minutes of play each day. And then the rest of the day, I'm using techniques from that, like in reflecting and listening and limit setting and like doing all of it. But it's consistent with now my family about like who we are as a family. This is how we do things.
Right. Right. So what I'm hearing from you is kind of like consume what you want to consume, but do what feels right and drop what doesn't feel right for your
And drop it.
family.
Yeah. And I guess that's like having a neurodiverse child now too. It was there's like, there's some lot, like if you, I grew up in a sports family, like sports, everybody plays
Yeah.
sports. Like, and now I have two kids that don't do anything with sports. And I'm like, oh, that's not like going to be who we are as a family. And that's not where we're going to find our community. And okay. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they'll go back to sports, but it's just like, that's okay. Whatever it is fine with me. But it's like, it's never going to be like how we imagine it in our heads or like on the movies.
Right. Right. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because you come from a huge sports family. So what is that like when it's not how you imagined?
You know what? It's been like amazing. The difference in what they're bringing. I mean, it sucks at like family events when everybody's like, woo, all the sports stuff. But like otherwise, my kids' interests and how they engage with their friends and stuff is just really different than what I expected. And it's cool. And yeah, I feel like really like proud of who they are.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I like what you said about like keep what resonates. That makes a lot of sense. There was one thing I had learned, and it resonated a lot with me, and it's a very small thing, but using the phrase "be safe" instead of "be careful." And I realized because I'm always like, like all the time. I always said, "Be careful" from the second he was born. And I realized he was getting timid, and I started shifting to be safe. And I just, that small thing made such a difference for us, for our dynamic. And I still slip all the time and say, be careful, but I'm realizing it's creating like that resonated and that worked for my family, not necessarily for other people's. Like it's like these little nuggets that have kind of happened. And I see the difference that it might make.
Like I love that because I think that like because you're looking at yourself and you're looking at what your concerns are and altering your behavior. And then the thing around safe and careful, like, is like also asking kids, like, like when kids are scaling something, like, are they putting their foot? Does that feel safe where they're like standing as they're climbing this tree? Does that branch feel
Right.
safe? And it's actually a perfect metaphor because, like, as you watch this child climb a tree, there might be a place where you see them grabbing on a twig and you're like, oh, that's a twig. Even if it feels safe to you, I can't let you use that twig
Right.
as something to continue to climb this tree.
Right.
But all along, you're saying, does that feel safe? Do you feel the branch under your foot? Now, like if you bend your knees and push up, like you're grabbing in this other branch. And it's this climbing of the tree where they have a lot of autonomy and freedom to do it. And there's somewhere maybe where you're going to have to like draw a line.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you mentioned the quiet moments, that's something that works for you. Talk a little bit more about that.
Oh. Well, it's just like interesting because I think what we're talking about are like our family values. Like that's why you have to take and leave what you get. So my kid, like my like child who like we wanted to keep going. Like, okay, every Saturday after school, then now you do this, now you do that. Like everybody's got all these things. And then like she wouldn't be able to go to school the next day. And so we started seeing like, oh, this is too much. Like, what is this? And so we started carving out a lot of time. And so now actually specifically we have a lot of like downtime carved into our schedule with our kids because they benefit from that. And they now the younger one benefits from it too, but then there's like free play time and
right.
Like the TV's not on and like, oh, what are you going to do? You're like bored. All right, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go do laundry. And like they migrate to doing like Legos or they go to different places in the house, and they're playing by themselves and doing so. But I had to learn that because I was ready to overschedule this.
Right. I want to briefly talk about boredom because I think that is a dying experience. I especially want to talk about boredom in the single child household. And as a therapist, how do you help parents with that?
Sure.
And maybe as Chris and a therapist, how do you help Nicole and Matt with that?
So Charlie's still young. And like, so, I talk about the special playtime, but like that is where they get your complete attention for this 5 minutes of play. Then they listen and they do things better in other places. And sometimes the things you played with during that play, they can grow in their bored state. And then the tolerating of I'm bored, and you're like, you're bored. Yes.
And then just sit there. That's the quiet.
Because he has to decide, like he's got things, there's things for him to do. Like you can put things out too, like markers and crayons and blocks and whatever. And there's a couple of options and like,
yeah, there's a million things to do.
And it's tolerating that. And then it's also playing with him sometimes. And you're going to flip flop back and forth. And sometimes you're going to be frustrated and feel like I had to do too much playing and I'm not your playmate.
Well, it's hours of playing. And then it's like, if you have 1 second, I'm bored. It's interesting because one of the things I'm hearing you do so well in this conversation is, again, the reflecting, the being curious, and then the shutting up. Like you don't have to problem solve.
Right. And like, in fact, you can't. Like, as they get older, they're like, you can list 20 things and none of them will be right. So I've actually learned that if I'm quiet, probably number 3 on my list is something they might do. But if I had suggested it, it would not be what they do.
They would have never done it. It behooves us to bite our tongue.
A lot. Like
it behooves us to have to bite marks on our tongues. I like that.
I'm not into injury.
Of course not, but I love this. So Chris, like wrapping this up with we just went around the world with this, and I love this conversation because it's all the kind of like nagging things as a parent and like the self-judgment that you might feel when you're doing something, or how should you do something, or Joe Schmo is doing this kind of parenting. What am I doing? Like, there's just so many ways to judge ourselves. And I love where you landed about do what resonates for your family and what resonates with you, and don't do the other things. Like, I love that. It's very simple advice, but it's very, very true. Because I can also imagine if it doesn't resonate, it's hard to do it effectively. It's hard to do it in a real, authentic way. So if there's 5 takeaways that you would want people to leave with this conversation, because we went everywhere, what are those 5 takeaways?
So I'm going to start with what you were just talking about, but how it resonates for you is you have to be somewhat clear as a parent. And so that, I was listening to a bunch of your podcasts, and there was a theme through every single one about the role of the parent and like how our modeling, like who we are as people. Like you had an amazing eating disorder therapist on, and she talked about if the mom's like not eating or the dad's not eating dinner and providing dinner, what's the message the kids are taking?
Right.
And so as simple as that sounds about what resonates for us, it requires us to go through over our own internal hurdles, our own ancestral baggage of what we're bringing. And so it can be hard to figure out what resonates, but what makes it easier is when you can center on yourself. And doing your own therapy and doing your own work and finding your own center, then those other pieces fall into place so easily. In order to find what resonates, you also have to be center and clear as a parent yourself. So that would be I think I can't underestimate, that one's so huge. Because again, it's in every podcast when you're doing this work with kids is there was a mom of a depressed teen, and she talked about, I wish I would have paid attention to the mental health development of my child much younger. And so that's all this relational stuff we're talking about, the relationship with our child, but then again requires us to be clear, in who we are and what we're bringing to our family as the parents.
I got to say something before you go on. Yes, 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 yes. Because I think the bottom line is you and I are both in the therapy world. And so we're aware of this and have spent careers where it's here's my problem, my child.
Right.
It's always the family. It's not here's the problem. It's looking at it's looking at the system. It's looking at the family dynamic. It's everything. And we really do. Getting our own help and doing our own exploration is just key and beyond parenting in just so many aspects of our life. And it's how are we showing up and what are we carrying? So yes. Okay.
Which is like actually the second is that I can like your child is in a dynamic with you, and your family is in a dynamic with the larger system. So if
Yeah.
you're feeling guilty or like you're doing things wrong, like you're in dynamic, like look at it, like look at what that is, because it's not just you either. It's not your, so in the way you don't want to hang your child out, I can assure you it's not just your child, it's not just your family, it's, and so in doing this work, you're making things better for your children moving forward, that it's not them as the problem, it's not you as the problem. And then you can see like the systems more clearly. Sorry, I'm just going to go off. So Britt Hawthorne wrote this book on raising anti-racist children. She got to the point that she had to pull her children out of school because of the pervasive racism that exists in the system. If she wasn't centered enough to see that clearly, she wouldn't have been able to like figure out like how the system was affecting her family. And then that became her priority, and that became the work that she did. And so that's like, you might feel like it's just you, it's just your family, and if you could do better or you could coach your kid better to be in the world, but it's not that. It's like you want your household to be safe. And how do you make your household safe is listening to your child and looking at these, like what else is happening in the world. And I guess, yeah, I mean, saying yes and saying no, that would be the other piece, is like, you have to say no and you have to say yes, but you have to figure that out again for your own family. And that's what I love doing with families individually, is because then I can help them find those values. Like what
Right.
is for you, and then what are the things that you love and want to keep going, and like what are the things that are making things hard, and how do you chip away at say no to those things. And then how do you set limits for your children in keeping them safe in the world. That was a lot,
But bam, it's a lot, but like really profound. Like, it's interesting because they're small things, but they're profound things that make all the difference in your life. So I love this. This was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today and talking to me about all this stuff. It really nice facial expression. This was wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Hey Kiddo. If you like what you hear, give us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about Hey Kiddo at our website, hey-kiddo.com. Have a question for our experts? Email us at hello@hey-kiddo.com.